and welcome back to Your Viewpoint. This is your host, Patrick Deya. Today, here in the studio, I have the Ambassador of Kenya. Now, Your Excellency, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the business world. First, just to piggyback on the last question about the ICC, do you think that situation right now maybe has some adverse effect on businesses looking to go into Kenya? How does it affect the business world?
Yes, it does. It does send the wrong message. Anything and everything that happens in Kenya at this point is a pointer towards the level of commitment of the country towards the reforms. Our commitment to being a part of the international community, our commitment towards creating an enabling environment for development, an enabling environment for investors, both local and international. So the moment that the international community and the potential and prospective investors hear that issues are now arising as a result of individuals being adversely mentioned, for example, in the post-election violence, and the possibility of people going to The Hague, and the tensions that come as a result of that within the country, people then take the wait-and-see approach. So your average business person, your average investor will say, well, let's see how Kenyans will manage this. So this is one of the side effects and the unfortunate results of the kinds of things that might happen if we don't quickly take control of this and do what we need to do. The right thing to do is to allow the law and to take its course and to send the right signals to Kenyans and to the international community that we are serious about fighting impunity, that justice needs to be seen in terms of the post-election violence, the people who lost their lives, the people who are displaced. Because if we don't, then the signal and the message that we will be sending to Kenyans and to people outside of Kenya will be that Kenya isn't really changing. The culture of impunity persists, and that the changes that we are talking about with the new constitution and the sort of new sense of dispensation and the sense of optimism for change, that is all a facade. We don't want that to be the message, so we hope that we'll be able to manage that and continue sending the positive messages about Kenya being ready for business, the serious investments that we're making in infrastructure, the serious investments we're making in education and healthcare, the fact that we are a key player and a key actor within the region, within the East African community, the largest and a very vibrant economy. We have an incredible private sector, an economy that is growing at 5%. From 2.5% just 2.5 years ago, after the post-election violence period, and we are predicting that by the end of this year, we could be growing at 6%. That's quite significant.
And you mentioned the East African industry. Last year there was signing of an agreement of business. How business
free
is
trade.
done within
That's right.
East Africa.
Yes.
Certainly, this region, about 150 million people.
Right.
What is Kenya's role, and how do you see this East African community helping or increasing business in the region? And how do you see, the second part of this is, how do you see this in light of the other regions, for example, the ECOWAS or the COMESA?
Thank you. Very good question. Well, Kenya and East Africa needs to be, any discussion and conversation about Kenya and East Africa needs to be situated in the bigger context of the continent of Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa particularly. This is the continent that has grown consistently over the last 10 years. This is the continent that has actually had the highest growth in the last 10 years compared to any other region in the world. This is the region in the world that has come out of the global economic and financial crisis faster than anybody else. This is also the continent that in the next 10 years, everybody will be going to. The Chinese and the Indians are already coming in large droves. The North Americans and the Europeans ought to learn something about that. There is something. And everybody knows that the continent is extremely rich and wealthy with natural resources. There are commodities and resources on that continent that the world needs for this global economy to continue growing. We have 40% of the gold, we have 60% of the diamond. In another 5-6 years, we will be producing 20% of the world's oil. We have some of the world's most precious metals and minerals. We have a growing middle class. We have a population that in another 7, 8, 10 years maximum will hit 1 billion. That's a significant market. Growing levels of education and therefore, and a very youthful population. We have a continent where 60% of the population are people under the ages of 80. With growing economies, an increased number of young men and women getting an education, getting vocational skills, and being productive citizens. This is really the continent where things will be happening in the next few years. So within the continent then, there are now regional blocks that are being formed. One of the things that we learned during the economic crisis is that Africa can do a lot more trade within itself. So within East Africa, the East African Community, the 5 countries of Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi have been very actively strengthening what we call the East African Community. We have a customs protocol. We, as you mentioned, last year signed a free trade agreement which enables capital, people to flow back and forth within the 5 countries. But the East African Community is also a part of a larger regional bloc called the Common Market for East and Southern Africa. The East African Community has 150 million population, but when you take the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, you're talking about 500 million. Kenya is a very, very key player. Within the East African Community, we have close to 40% of the gross domestic product. We are the strongest economy. But not only are we the strongest economy and the gateway into the East and Southern Africa region, we also have invested very heavily in making sure that the East African Community really becomes a regional bloc and a regional market. We've invested heavily in roads that come out of the country, go into the north, into Sudan, all the way to Juba. We have invested into rails and roads, again going westwards into Uganda, into Rwanda and Burundi, and southwards into Tanzania as well. In Nairobi, within 4 hours, we now have an airline that can get you to at least 25% of Africa's capitals within 4 hours out of Nairobi. So we're very much the center of things and want to make sure that we take good advantage of that, capitalize on that, to help Kenya to grow, but also to help the rest of the region also to grow.
Now, as vibrant as it seems like the African economy is growing, it still does only maybe 1.5%
Absolutely.
of the world trade.
Yes.
How do they move from that? I mean, and there seems to be a gap between
Yes.
the riches.
Yes.
When you read economic journals, the investment, the
Yes.
return on investment in
Yes.
the African countries are
Yes.
very high, and
Yeah,
yet the
you're
trade.
absolutely right.
That's a
Yes.
trade gap.
Yes.
How do they?
It is you're absolutely right. It is interesting that there are people who will talk about the risks involved in investing in Africa, and yet it is the place where they yield the highest returns. That's one. Secondly, you're absolutely right. We are an extremely wealthy continent with all these resources, and yet we do contribute to less than 2% of the world trade. Why is that? It's very simple. The reason for that is that Africa, historically, has put in the international market raw products. Kenya, for example, we are the world's largest producer of black tea. Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi together produce some of the world's best coffee. But we put our products in the international market in the raw form. Between the production and the consumption, there are several stakeholders in the value chain, all of whom benefit very significantly. They talk about Switzerland, for example, being the world's largest exporter of coffee, and yet Switzerland doesn't have a coffee tree at all. They don't even know what a coffee tree looks like, or coffee bean for that matter. Why? For the simple reason, the value addition to all our products happens everywhere except on the continent. That is beginning to change. Many African countries are now encouraging investors who will come in and do the value addition on the continent. Kenya, for sure, is working very hard towards, with our key commodities, that investors come to Kenya, invest, go into joint ventures with Kenyan business people, Kenyan businessmen and women, into joint ventures in the agriculture sector. A very good example, value addition, so that we are a world leader in producing, for example, cut flowers. We are a world leader in producing certain very exotic vegetables and fruit. We are looking for investors who will come and work with us, invest, create jobs here, make money, add value, help us to put commodities and products in the international market that have been value added, make their profits still, bring some of the profits back to the United States so that they can create employment for Americans who also need that employment. So it is, a big part of it is about value addition. But I think we have over the years learned that what we need to do is to make sure that we position ourselves to play in this global economy, in this global market, by doing the things that other people have been doing, which are not rocket science. Converting coffee beans into the coffee that is consumed at Starbucks or any coffee shop is very basic science, and so we need to do that, build our own cottage industries, for example.
Is there a specific or certain areas or sectors of the business that maybe Africa should be looking at as a faster engine to drive the economy, drive employment, drive investment? Is there such area? Because most of Africa, as you say, has raw materials.
Yes.
But there are investments and businesses that have higher values. Is there a specific areas or sectors that?
For Kenya, we believe very strongly that the service sector, which includes things such as the financial sector, we are at the moment the hub in terms of finance and financial management in the region. ICT provides an incredible opportunity. In the last 2 years, Kenya has introduced 4 fiber optic cables, and that opens up a whole range of possibilities and opportunities in terms of the things that we can do, the employments that we can create, and also the fact that we can now leapfrog a lot of what the development processes that the developed countries went through. A good example, for example, is the mobile telephone and the telephony sector, the communication sector. We have been able to just completely revolutionize the communication sector by privatizing that sector and allowing mobile telephone companies to come in. In Kenya, 10 years ago, just 10 years ago, only 350,000 Kenyans had access to a telephone. Once we liberalized and opened up the communication sector and private companies came into this sector, and the mobile telephone sector came in, just 10 years later, we now have a situation where we have 5 mobile service providers, and we have close to 20 million Kenyans now with access to phone. And not only do they have access to a telephone, we have also innovated. We are now able to, we are the first country in the world to use the mobile telephone for purposes of money transfer. That's an innovation that is a Kenyan innovation. So that's just one example of the possibilities. And the ripple effect of something like the mobile telephone and the transfer of money, this ability of people sitting in towns in different parts of the country and transferring money to rural areas, to their friends and relatives who would otherwise not have access to money to do the things that they need to do in order to get themselves out of poverty, has completely done wonders in the country. So that's just one example in terms of an opportunity to leapfrog so that we don't have to go through the entire industrial revolution and so forth and so on.
And we continue with this interview with His Excellency Ambassador Elkanah Odembo, Ambassador from Kenya to the United States. We'll be right back.